The restaurant was full of light and laughter, but to Emma, it felt like a stage built for her sister's show. Claire sat across from her, dressed in a perfect red dress, talking loudly enough for the whole table to hear. It was supposed to be a family dinner to celebrate Claire's engagement, but somehow, it had turned into another one of her performances. Every word Claire spoke carried the same tone she'd used since childhood, charming, confident, and sharp enough to cut. "You should have seen her office," Claire said, pointing at Emma with her glass of wine. "It's smaller than my closet." She's always been the serious one, never could have fun. Everyone laughed politely, including her fiancé, Daniel, though his smile looked strained. Emma smiled too, but her eyes didn't. Inside, something cold started to rise. Not anger exactly, but a familiar ache she had learned to hide well. Claire loved to play the role of the perfect sister, beautiful, social, and adored, while Emma was the quiet one who preferred books to parties and long work hours to weekend trips. She had never tried to compete. She didn't need to. But tonight, Claire wasn't satisfied with just being admired. She wanted Emma small. Emma looked at Daniel carefully. He was polite, well-dressed, and clearly uncomfortable with Claire's constant teasing. He kept glancing at Emma as if trying to apologize without words. "It's fine," Emma said calmly when Claire's joke dragged on too long. "Some of us measure success differently." The air around the table tightened. Claire gave a loud laugh. "Always so sensitive," she said, waving a hand like she was swatting away a fly. Emma's father tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. Everyone saw it. The subtle tension between the sisters, the kind that had been there for years but never spoken aloud. Emma wasn't angry, at least not in the way she used to be. She had learned a long time ago that silence was more powerful than shouting. She simply sat there, letting Claire fill the room with her own noise, until it began to sound hollow. As the dinner went on, Claire talked about her upcoming wedding, the luxury venue, the guest list, the designer gown. Every detail was meant to impress. Emma nodded, smiled, and sipped her water. She could feel eyes on her, people wondering how she could sit there and take it. But she wasn't there for revenge. Not yet. When dessert came, Claire raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, looking directly at Emma, "and to finding someone who can actually make us proud." Another round of forced laughter followed. Emma looked down at her plate, then met Daniel's eyes. He looked pale, and for a moment, she saw something flicker there. A shadow of worry. Guilt, maybe. It was quick, but enough for her to notice. She didn't know what it meant yet, but something about him didn't feel right. After dinner, as they all stood to leave, Claire wrapped her arm around Daniel's and smiled sweetly. "You know," she said to Emma, "you could learn a thing or two about charm. Not everything's about hard work." Emma smiled back, her voice calm and even. "And not everything's about appearances." Claire blinked, caught off guard for once. Then she laughed again, that practiced, polished laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Emma turned to leave before anyone could say more. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet, a relief after the noise inside. She took a deep breath, watching her breath cloud in the cold. She had spent her life being compared, mocked, and overlooked by her sister, and she thought she had moved past it. But tonight reminded her that some wounds only hide. They never really heal. When Emma got home, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat at her desk. The soft glow of her desk lamp lit the stacks of legal files spread across it. Her life was quiet but solid. Years of discipline, study, and choices that had made her one of the youngest judges in the district. It wasn't glamorous, but it was earned. She opened her laptop to check her schedule for the week. A new case had been added that afternoon. Her eyes landed on the name, Daniel Whitmore versus the state. The words hit her like ice water. Daniel Whitmore, Claire's fiancé. She blinked, reading it again. Same name, same company, same man. She leaned back slowly, heartbeat quickening, the echo of Claire's laughter still ringing in her ears. The sister who had mocked her for being too serious was marrying a man under investigation for fraud. Emma stared at the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line. For the first time that night, she smiled, not out of joy but realization. The same woman who had tried to humiliate her in public was about to face something far worse. Only this time, Emma wouldn't need to say a word. The truth would speak for her. Emma sat in her office early the next morning, her coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the name glowing on her computer screen. Daniel Whitmore. She had checked the case file 3 times to be sure. It was him, Claire's charming, confident fiancé. The man who had sat across from her pretending to laugh at her sister's jokes was now facing serious financial misconduct charges. The irony was too sharp to ignore. She read through the documents quickly, her eyes moving from one piece of evidence to another. Bank statements, emails, and anonymous reports from his company. It wasn't a small mistake. It was calculated fraud, the kind that could destroy a career and reputation in one blow. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the situation pressing against her. She wasn't just looking at another defendant. This was her sister's future husband, and his trial would be in her courtroom. The decision before her was heavy. She could easily ask to be removed from the case. It would be the professional thing to do. Judges often recused themselves when personal connections existed. But as she stared at the file, something deep inside her resisted. For years, Claire had called her boring, cold, and humorless. Yet here she was, the boring sister, holding the power to determine the fate of the man Claire bragged about. Still, Emma wasn't cruel. She didn't want revenge for the sake of it. She wanted fairness. She wanted truth. But it was impossible not to feel the sting of poetic justice. All day, she found herself lost in thought. During meetings, she nodded absent-mindedly. Her assistant noticed the change but didn't ask questions. Emma rarely showed emotion, but now her calm mask felt harder to keep. When she got home that night, she opened her laptop again and reread the evidence. The deeper she went, the more disgusted she became. Daniel wasn't just careless. He was deceptive. He had taken advantage of people's trust, manipulating funds for personal gain. The public didn't know yet, but once the trial began, everything would surface. Every lie, every false claim. And when it did, Claire's perfect image of her dream fiancé would fall apart. Emma tried to convince herself that none of it was her business. Her duty was to the law, not to her emotions. But when she remembered Claire's voice mocking her at dinner, laughing as if Emma's life was a joke, the ache returned. She had always been quiet, but that didn't mean weak. Tonight, she finally saw how life had shifted. The same sister who once pitied her would soon face the one truth she could never control: justice. The next morning, Emma walked into the courthouse, the air inside cool and still. Her heels echoed down the hallway as she passed the portraits of judges who had served before her. She wondered what they would think if they knew what she was about to do. Was it justice or something personal hiding behind duty? She pushed the thought aside. The law didn't bend for feelings. She took her seat behind the bench, her posture straight, her face calm. She had made her choice. She wouldn't step down. She would oversee the trial as she would any other. Fair, honest, and by the book. Later that afternoon, she received the official case briefing. Daniel's attorney had filed for a delay, but it was denied. The hearing was set for Monday. Emma's name was printed on the notice in bold letters. Presiding Judge, Emma Hayes. The reality of it hit her fully now. She would have to look him in the eye, the same man who had smiled politely while Claire mocked her, and see the fear behind his calm mask. She imagined the moment he'd realize who was sitting behind that bench. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not happiness, but closure. That evening, Claire called her, sounding cheerful. "Emma, you'll never believe it. Daniel's company had some audit thing this week, but it's nothing serious," she said, laughing lightly. "He's so stressed about it, though." Emma's grip tightened on her phone. "I'm sure he is," she replied softly. Claire didn't notice the edge in her voice. She kept talking, bragging about wedding plans, her guest list, her dress. Emma let her talk until she ran out of words, then said, "Good luck with everything, Claire," and hung up. For the first time, she didn't feel small in their conversations. She felt in control, not because she wanted to hurt her sister, but because life had given her a moment of balance after years of being dismissed. As she prepared for court that weekend, she kept her emotions locked away. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She reminded herself that a judge's strength was in fairness. But still, late at night, when the courthouse was quiet and the world outside asleep, she would glance at the case file and wonder if fate had simply decided to even the scales on its own. Whatever the reason, come Monday, the truth would be exposed, and this time Emma wouldn't need to say a single word. The truth would do it for her. The courtroom was packed when Emma entered, her black robe flowing behind her as the murmurs faded to silence. Reporters waited near the back, notebooks ready, sensing this case would make headlines. The defendant stood at the front, Daniel Whitmore. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by unease. When their eyes met, his face went pale. He recognized her instantly, the quiet sister he'd seen at dinner, the one his fiancé had mocked. Now she was the judge sitting in front of him, holding the power to decide his fate. Emma didn't flinch. She had spent her life preparing for moments like this. The bailiff called for order, and the hearing began. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, trying to downplay the accusations, but Emma's focus stayed on the evidence displayed on the screen. Transaction records, confidential emails, and signed documents connecting Daniel to insider trading. It was clear and undeniable. The room was tense, every word echoing sharply. From the back row, Claire sat frozen. She had arrived late, expecting a routine hearing, maybe even a chance to show support for her fiancé. But when she saw her sister behind the bench, her expression changed completely. Her mouth opened slightly, eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't known. No one had told her Emma was the presiding judge. For the first time, Claire was speechless. Emma noticed her but didn't react. Years of discipline kept her face still, though her pulse beat faster. She listened to the prosecution's argument, methodical and strong, each piece of evidence pulling Daniel deeper into guilt. His lawyer tried to recover, blaming lower employees and claiming Daniel had been misled, but the timeline and documents told another story. Every lie sounded weaker than the last. As the evidence unfolded, Daniel's hands trembled slightly. He looked toward Claire, seeking comfort, but she couldn't even meet his eyes. Her confident mask had cracked, replaced with confusion and fear. She finally understood that the man she had built her future around was not who she thought he was. And worse, the sister she had belittled was the one delivering justice. Emma kept her tone calm and professional. She asked clear questions, pointed out inconsistencies, and allowed no distractions. The entire courtroom could feel her quiet authority. Daniel avoided her gaze now, realizing the weight of what stood before him. When the closing statements ended, silence filled the room. Emma reviewed her notes, then lifted her eyes. Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the storm of memory. Years of being underestimated, humiliated, and ignored by her own sister. This was the moment she could destroy what Claire valued most. Yet she also knew this was the moment that would define who she truly was. She wasn't a bitter sister seeking payback. She was a judge, sworn to the truth. She took a deep breath and looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her voice clear and controlled, "the evidence shows deliberate misconduct and manipulation of financial data for personal gain. The court finds you guilty on all counts." The sound of her gavel striking the bench echoed through the room, final and sharp. Daniel's shoulders slumped. His lawyer whispered urgently, but the verdict was done. Claire gasped quietly, her hand covering her mouth. She couldn't look away from her sister, the sister she had mocked for years, now the symbol of justice in front of everyone. Emma stood, the robe heavy but her conscience clear. She had done her job with fairness, not revenge. She had chosen the law over emotion. As she turned to leave the courtroom, she passed Claire, who stood frozen in place, eyes glassy and full of regret. "Claire," Emma said softly as she walked by, "sometimes the truth teaches harder lessons than we ever expect." Then she kept walking, her steps even and firm. Outside, the flash of cameras greeted her, but she ignored them, stepping into the sunlight. Reporters shouted questions about the case, but she stayed silent. The wind felt crisp against her face, and for the first time in years she felt light. She hadn't needed to get revenge or prove her worth. Life had done it for her. In the end, she had stayed true to who she was, calm, strong, and unshaken. As she reached her car, she caught her reflection in the window. The same face Claire used to call plain now looked powerful, dignified. Justice had been served, not for her pride, but for the truth. And though Claire's world had just fallen apart, Emma didn't feel triumph, only peace. The kind that comes when you let life deliver its own kind of revenge. When the courtroom emptied and the echo of the gavel faded, Emma stayed behind for a moment, staring at the empty seats. The tension that had built over days was gone, replaced by a quiet calm she hadn't felt in years. She closed her case files slowly, every movement deliberate. Outside the tall windows, the city buzzed with its usual noise, but inside, the silence was heavy and cleansing. The case was over. Daniel Whitmore, her sister's fiancé, had been found guilty. Justice had been served, but not through anger or revenge, through truth. Emma took off her robe and placed it neatly on the chair. For the first time in her career, a case had touched her personally, yet she had managed to stay steady. That, she realized, was her real victory. As she walked out of the courtroom, Claire stood waiting by the hallway, eyes red, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. She looked smaller than usual, her usual confidence gone. When she saw Emma, her lips parted, but no words came at first. Finally, she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice trembled, not with anger but confusion and guilt. Emma paused, meeting her sister's eyes, the same eyes that once looked down on her. "Would you have listened?" she asked quietly. Claire didn't answer. She just looked away, tears threatening to fall. For years, she had treated Emma like someone she needed to outshine. Now she finally saw her as the woman she had become, calm, powerful, and untouchable. Emma didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Life had a way of balancing things on its own. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Claire," she said softly. "I just did my job." Claire nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "I know. I just didn't realize how much I hurt you before." Emma didn't reply. Some truths didn't need to be spoken out loud. She gave her sister a small nod and walked past her, leaving Claire standing alone in the hallway. As Emma stepped outside, the afternoon sun hit her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply. It wasn't triumph she felt, it was peace. For years, she had lived in her sister's shadow, carrying the quiet pain of being underestimated. But now, she didn't need anyone's validation. Her actions had spoken louder than anything she could ever say. The next few days passed quietly. The media buzzed about the case, reporters debated the verdict, and Daniel's company began to crumble under the pressure. Claire disappeared from public view, avoiding calls and hiding from the noise. Emma didn't reach out. She didn't need to. The bond between them had broken long ago, not because of the trial, but because of years of pride and cruelty. Yet deep down, Emma hoped this experience would teach her sister something, that true strength didn't come from wealth or beauty, but from integrity and humility. One morning, a week after the trial, a small envelope arrived at Emma's office. There was no name on it, just her title, Judge Hayes. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't see who you really were until it was too late. I hope one day you can forgive me." It wasn't signed, but she didn't need to guess. The handwriting was Claire's. Emma read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but she felt something soften inside her. Maybe it was enough that her sister finally understood. That evening, as Emma drove home, the city lights flickered across her windshield. She thought about how strange life could be, how the same people who once made you feel small could one day stand in awe of your strength. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't need revenge, or apologies, or validation. She had found something better, self-respect and peace. She remembered how helpless she used to feel during their childhood arguments, how Claire's laughter used to echo in her mind. Now those echoes were gone. In their place was silence, calm, powerful, and freeing. When she reached home, she made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the night spread over the city. Somewhere out there, Claire was facing her own lessons, and Daniel was dealing with the consequences of his choices. Emma didn't wish them harm. She only hoped they learned what she already knew, that no one escapes the truth. Justice didn't always come through revenge. Sometimes it came through patience, and patience had always been Emma's quiet strength. She took a sip of her tea and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes not from victory, but from understanding. She had closed a chapter that had haunted her for years. The little sister who once sat quietly at the dinner table, humiliated and ignored, had grown into a woman of dignity and control. And in the end, she hadn't needed to shout or fight back. Life had given her the perfect moment, and she had chosen grace over anger. That, she realized, was the true meaning of power. Knowing you could destroy someone and still choosing not to. As the city lights flickered outside, Emma whispered to herself, "It's over." And this time she meant it.